Well, let's talk to Robert Kelly about this latest development. Mr. Kelly is in South Korea. He's a political science professor at Busan National University. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Last night, we had the US president say that a major conflict with North Korea is a chance, and you immediately tweeted, you said, no, there's not. Here we are, 24 hours later, another missile launch, yes, possibly a failure, but do you still think there is no chance of a conflict?
I think the chances of a conflict are very low, in part because it would be so devastating. The North Koreans have an alliance with China. An American airstrike on North Korea would not be something like what you saw in Syria, where it would be over in a few hours. The North Koreans have been hardening their society for decades against American intervention as a sort of response to what happened in the Korean War. And so any action would take days or even weeks. That might activate Chinese intervention. We don't know what the thresholds are for the North Korean People's Army to hit back. If they're being bombed for weeks, they probably would hit back. This cannot be done surgically.
Do you think there would ever be a preemptive strike by North Korea?
I do not. I think that the primary purpose of the North Korean weapons program, nuclear missile, the size of its army, it's very large. I think all of that is intended to keep North Korea from being attacked, to keep something along the lines of what happened in Iraq or Libya from happening to them. I do not actually believe that North Korea has offensive intentions anymore. I think it would be very hard for North Korea to digest a country as modern and big as South Korea. I think what they really want to do is just hang on and not be eliminated the way, say, Gaddafi was.
How credible do you think these reports are that this missile exploded after takeoff?
Well, I believe that. I mean, they would find stuff, right? I mean, there would be pieces of it in the Sea of Japan or something like that, right? There would be sort of missile tracking. No, the North Koreans have tested many missiles and many of them fail. I mean, one of the sort of backsides to this story, sort of all the hype of the last couple of weeks, is that the North Korean missile tests actually fail on a pretty regular basis. Their nuclear program is pretty established, but they're having trouble developing missiles. Now they're going to keep doing it. They'll eventually get to an ICBM and things like that, but they're having a lot of trouble. That's why they keep running so many tests.
How soon do you think they'll have a nuclear missile?
Well, I think they will have the ability to strike the United States, I think, within 5 to 10 years. That seems to be the figure that's being thrown around. I mean, I have no particular special pipeline into North Korea or anything like that. I read what everybody else reads, but I do think the North Koreans probably have the ability to deliver a missile in the region here, a nuclear missile here in the region in East Asia. The real trick is whether or not they can strike the continental United States. It seems like the 5 to 10 year timeline is what we're hearing a lot now.
Now, we've heard Rex Tillerson, and he's called on the rest of the world to help force North Korea to give up its nuclear ambitions. I mean, how likely is it that A, the rest of the world will get on board, especially the Chinese, and B, that Kim Jong-un would say, oh, of course, yes, no problem?
Well, first of all, that's a great idea. That is the best idea that I've heard from the Trump administration in the last 2 or 3 weeks on North Korea. Striking North Korea, I think, would be terrible. What we really need to do is sort of clip away at North Korea's diplomatic relationships, which is what it uses to prop up the regime by bringing in all kinds of illicit resources. So Secretary Tillerson is dead on. This is a great idea. Like you said, China is the most important one. China is the biggest pipeline into North Korea. That's the main target. I agree with the president that we need to sort of push China more on this. Will the North Koreans respond to your second question? I mean, to date, they have not, right? I mean, the North Koreans in the late 1990s, the North Koreans endured a famine that killed something like 1.5 to 2 million of their people. And they just didn't budge. They didn't change their economy. They didn't ask for outside assistance and stuff. They just simply rode through it. The North Koreans are willing, the government is willing to endure enormous amounts of pain in order to stay in power. That's why they're still there. So it's unlikely that they'll buckle, but I do believe that constricting their resources coming into North Korea will make it much harder for them to develop the nuclear and missile programs.
Were you surprised, given the rhetoric that we've seen coming out of the US, that we have really seen a change in the past 24 hours from a more hardlined approach to a more diplomatic one from the US?
Yes, I am. I think the Trump administration is sort of having trouble figuring out what exactly its North Korea policy is. In the last couple of weeks, we've heard about sort of airstrikes. If there was a 6th nuclear test, then Vice President Pence said we're going to have talks. Secretary Tillerson has sort of been all over the place. I'm surprised, actually, because the Trump people have turned this into they turned it into such a big deal. I'm actually kind of surprised there's not greater consistency on this. I think the right path is probably to go back to China. I'm not really sure if the war scare is really going to work, in part because I think so few people believe that Trump will actually strike. It will be so much different than Syria. It will be so much more risky.
And yet we've had the Chinese foreign minister saying that the key to solving the problem doesn't lie with his country.
Right. Yes, the Chinese have been saying that for a long time. It is correct that the Chinese do not have direct political leverage over North Korea. The North Koreans have tried for a long time to keep Chinese influence out of Pyongyang, out of the circles that run the country. But China, I do think, as we alluded to earlier, they do have a lot of oblique economic leverage because a lot of the resources that come into North Korea come through China. China is the main pipeline, right? Everybody, a lot of other countries really don't deal with North Korea. The South Koreans and the Americans have been trying to cut away those relationships for a long time, right? Without China, North Korea would be in terrible trouble. Again, in the late 1990s, when North Korea had no patron, when it was between sort of Soviet and Chinese assistance, North Korea had the terrible structural crisis, right? They had this gigantic famine. So I think if you can cut the Chinese umbilical to North Korea, they'll be in terrible shape. The Chinese say that's not true. I just don't believe them. I think that's inaccurate.
So when we're talking of a diplomatic solution, we're talking about sanctions, basically, or more sanctions.
The problem with diplomacy with North Korea, of course, is that they often don't do what they say they're going to do. The last time the United States struck a deal with North Korea in 2012, that was called the Leap Day deal, that began to collapse within a few weeks. During the Sunshine Policy period, when South Korea was reaching out to North Korea continued to develop its nuclear and missile programs in the background, even though South Korea was giving it financial assistance. It would be best if we could talk, but there's not a lot of evidence the North Koreans actually sort of respect those kinds of things. So yes, my sense is sanctions is the way to go. We need to go through China because there's not a whole lot in North Korea to sanction anymore. Right? What we really need to do is start talking to the Chinese about them enforcing the sanctions on North Korea.
Have relations ever been this bad between North Korea and the US?
In the late 1960s, probably not, although close. In the late 1960s, North Korea shot down a U.S. spy plane and captured a U.S. U.S. reconnaissance boat, which you can still see in Pyongyang, by the way, if you go. And then it was pretty bad. The Johnson and the Nixon administrations were both looking for a way to hit back North Korea. In the 1970s, there was a murder of 2 American soldiers in the demilitarized zone. That also was pretty tense. But in my time, this is certainly the most tense it's been. Certainly, this is worse than the worst years of 2010 and 2013.
Okay, Robert Kelly, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm slightly disappointed that your children and your wife haven't made an appearance, but perhaps next time.
I can invite them in.
Maybe next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.